Welcome to this evening's session, which is promoting speech development in the early years with myself and Becky Baxter. Just to say, this session is designed for children who are kind of 0 to 5 years, so that kind of preschool stage, maybe just moving in to reception. However, if you're here as a parent of a slightly older child, lots of these things are going to be really, really relevant for you as well. It's just the examples I'm going to be using. I'm going to start off with a slightly younger age group. It is quite a big age group, 0 to 5, so I'm going to go through quite a bit of information in the next kind of 45, 50 minutes. Please try not to feel overwhelmed because obviously 0 to 5 is quite a big range. But if you think about your child and where they are at the moment, and then try and take away some kind of things that are relevant for you right now, you can always come back to a future session when they get a bit older. Okay, let's get started. So what I'm going to try and cover in the next kind of 45, 50 minutes, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the speech difficulties that we see in children with Down syndrome. And then really the majority of this session is focusing on some practical ideas and activities of things that you can be doing at home. So we're going to think about some activities and strategies to support producing single sounds, so just things like and s, those sorts of sounds. Then thinking about if we've got those sounds, using those sounds in words like mummy or sock, for example. And then I'm just going to cover a little bit of putting words together, but some extra kind of activities for slightly older children, maybe, or some who've got some speech coming, just to kind of cover the whole range, as I've said. I will finish on just talking about the use of visual supports, and then, like I said, I'll leave time for any questions at the end. So just to kind of give a little bit of an introduction to the topic, we actually run a series of sessions for preschool, aimed at the preschool years, covering vocabulary and syntax, this one on speech, and then we do another one on communication. If you haven't been to one before, please don't worry. They're all available on demand anyway, or have a look out for when we do the next live one. We kind of separate them out into these different areas because they are different areas in terms of speech and language development, and it's quite a lot to go through just in this one area versus all kind of three areas. So just to say, when I'm talking about vocabulary, I'm really talking about single words. Any single words that your child understands, that will be their receptive vocabulary. So if you can say to them, oh, where's the teddy or the ball or the cup, and they can choose that one, we know that they look to that one. We know that they understand that word. They also have their expressive vocabulary. So again, that will be single words, but any single word that they can produce. So it might be a spoken word, or it might be a sign, or it might be that they're using some kind of alternative communication support, like showing pictures, or maybe slightly more high-tech device, maybe pressing buttons and the tablet says it for them, something like that. That would all be covered under their expressive vocabulary. In the early years, what we tend to see is children's receptive vocabulary is developing, and they're learning lots of words, they understand lots of words, but their expressive vocabulary is more delayed. And so, although they understand lots of words, they're maybe not able to say lots of words at this stage, which is a bit of a challenge, really, because they know that they want to be talking, they understand all these words, but yeah, we've got to give them different ways to be able to support that communication. We also know that the children need more repetitions to learn a word, and what can happen because of the hearing difficulties and the verbal short-term memory difficulties, I'll talk a little bit more about those in just a second. That can make learning words accurately a bit of a challenge, and I shall come back to that in just a second. So that's vocabulary. Syntax is then anything that involves over the single word level, putting words together, combining words. Again, we have more difficulty with expressive syntax, so being able to say sentences, put lots of words together, whereas our receptive language is often ahead of that. Our receptive syntax, we might follow and understand instructions like, can you get your shoes and your coat? But we're not yet saying shoes and coat. And we often have difficulty with what we call morphosyntax, which are those little bits of grammar in the language. So things like the and the and the for and the to, often much later to come, might be putting words together but missing those little words, those grammar words out. So that one, vocabulary and language, we do as a separate session, but it kind of gives you an idea of what's covered in that session. The other area is communication, which is particularly early communication skills or relative strength for children with Down syndrome. It covers things like non-verbal communication, eye contact, facial expression, also things like tone of voice. And so they might, I know they're not saying any words. You can see that they're quite cross with whatever you've asked them to do without necessarily saying many of those words. So early skills are a strength. Later skills are a bit more challenging, but that really is reflective of the language difficulties that we're having. So communication would include things like being able to start a conversation, being able to stay on topic for several turns in terms of communication, being able to say, oh, you haven't understood me, or I haven't understood you. And of course, all of that will do with language. So that has a knock-on impact there. But what we are focusing on tonight is speech. And when we're talking about speech, we're really talking about how intelligible the children are and how clearly they can say words and sounds. So I said I'd come back to this. When we're learning to talk, we really learn from listening. That's how typical language development happens. I hear a word, I remember a word, I store a word up here in my head, and then later on somebody says, oh, what's this? I retrieve that stored word and I have a go at saying it. Our children with Down syndrome have significant issues with hearing difficulties. I've got over 80% on the slide there. So a recent fact came out that over 90% of children with Down syndrome by the age of 1 will experience hearing loss. So hearing loss, particularly in the early years, can be a really big challenge. So we have difficulties hearing the word. We then have difficulties remembering the sounds and the sound pattern of that word, and then processing that word and storing it up here for meaning. So it's going to affect learning and remembering new words. If you hear a word like computer, say, oh, look, this is the computer. They've got to hear that word and they might only hear on pooter. They've got to remember the parts of that word and they might only remember pooter. And they've got to store that word up here and they might end up with ooter. And so when they go to say the word, if that word's not stored accurately, even if they say all the sounds and the syllables of that word as clearly as they can, it's not going to be computer, because that's not what they've got stored up here. And that is one responsibility for some of the speech difficulties. So we've got those input difficulties. Also affects, of course, understanding spoken language and following instructions. If you're having trouble remembering single words and hearing all of those sounds, if you've then got longer sentences, that's placing more of a demand on your hearing, verbal short-term memory processing system. So what happens is some of these words get stored up here with sounds missing or a little bit muddled up, which is going to have an impact on your speech. In addition to that, we have some differences in anatomy and physiology. So children with Down syndrome tend to have a large tongue compared to the size of their mouth or their oral cavity, which means often we have tongue protrusion. So children have got their tongue sticking out a little bit, and of course if they've got the tongue sticking out a little bit, that is going to impact on how clearly you're able to say some of these sounds. Teeth often come through later in a slightly different order again, and later on they lose their teeth or don't lose their teeth and they've got additional teeth coming through, what can impact on how you're going to say different sounds. But the other big challenge is that in the roof of your mouth is typically quite flat and broad, and for children with Down syndrome that often isn't the case. It's often what we call, they have a high vaulted palate. So if you look in your child's mouth, be careful if they have got teeth, you often see they've got The roof of the mouth is a bit like a hollow. Sometimes you get bits of food stuck up there, might come out a little bit later on. We make loads of sounds when we're talking, either by our tongue touching the roof of our mouth or by our tongue making a small closure between the tongue and the roof of your mouth. And of course, if your roof of your mouth is up there, that is likely to have an impact. So sounds like t, d, s, z, sh, r, l. Lots of them involve those that kind of contact or very close contact. So it's often one of the biggest challenges for children with Down syndrome. We have lots of children who are really trying to say words, trying to put words together, but not being able to make themselves understood. And that is behind their receptive vocabulary. So they'll understand loads of these words, but they're not making all of these sounds and they're not able to put these sounds together. And that's one of the biggest arguments for speech and language therapy input. It's not an even profile. It's not in line with what we would expect, given the fact they've got Down syndrome at all. It is a particular difficulty with speech. So really, in the first year, we know typically developing children are developing their speech sound system. We know it's going to be more of a challenge for children with Down syndrome, giving some of those input difficulties, some of those articulation difficulties that we've talked about, differences. And so speech work should start early and it will continue or need to continue throughout school. Now, if you're a parent of a child who's 4 or 5 and you think, oh, I haven't done any of this, don't panic. What just means is tomorrow we're going to start some work on some speech activities. That would be brilliant. The other thing to say is you have been, because all the time you're talking to your child, you are going to be giving them input in terms of speech development. So all of the songs that you've been doing, all of the chatting to them, all of the commenting, all of the describing has been good input in terms of this speech sound system. What we see in children with Down syndrome, so when children are learning to talk, all children do a range of what we call typical errors. So things like syllable reduction. So instead of saying banana, most children will say nana to start with. We have things like cluster reduction, so may miss out the first sound of a cluster. So instead of saying stairs, they may well say dares, for example. And often they might miss off the last sound of a word. So instead of saying cat, they might say cat to begin with, cat, cat. Those are examples of typical things that lots of children do when they're learning to talk. And then generally they will just grow out of. We see loads of those errors in our children with Down syndrome, just the same, but we also see some unusual errors, those that aren't typical. For example, we see missing off the first sounds in words. So instead of saying cat for cat, they might say at for cat. If you think about the last bit that you heard, maybe remembered, I think that kind of makes a little bit of sense. We also hear more palatal sounds like and lateral sounds like, and again, if we think about that anatomy we talked about, we can see why that might be the case. We also see lots of variability and inconsistency in the children. So if you ask them to say the same word 3 times, they might say it slightly differently each time, which, or equally, if they have trouble with the sound, they might do it in some words, but they don't have trouble with it in other words. So there's lots of variability and inconsistency. So we can see why there are likely to be challenges. What that really means is the children need extra practice at listening and developing that sound system, storing all those sounds, learning all those sounds in words, learning those accurate sound patterns. And then lots of practice at production, at saying those sounds, at having a go at saying those words. We start off with single sounds, move on to words, and then thinking about putting those words in little sentences or phrases. Just some kind of general tips before we get into the kind of nitty-gritty of the activities. Limiting background noise is really, really helpful. And I think that kind of sounds obvious, but if you've got a child who's got hearing difficulties, got difficulties with that verbal short-term memory, having the radio on in the background is going to impact how well they can hear some of those sounds and those words. Similarly, having the TV on in the background. Now, I'm not saying don't ever listen to the radio or watch the TV. Of course you will, just for sanity. But it does mean that when you're doing some of this sound work and when you're doing your bit of play and you're talking and you're really focusing on your child listening, just being aware of turning that background noise off when you can. If you've got other children, getting them involved and doing the activity as well, rather than banging around and making different noises in the background and distracting, is another kind of good example. Want to make the most of visual supports. I've said about the visual, I've said about the verbal short-term memory difficulties. We have a relative strength in visual short-term memory, much better at remembering what we've seen. And so when we're thinking about teaching children sounds and words, we really want to make sure that they're looking at our faces and they can see really clearly where your mouth is, your teeth, your tongue is as you're talking. We really want to encourage babble as much as possible. So when your child starts to do the kind of da 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 or wow 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 wow, you're going to go, oh, I heard you, brilliant, and really kind of respond to that, and then give a pause, give them a chance to do some more, and then respond to that. We want them to learn that making sounds is really great, and we really respond to you when you make sounds and try and say words, to encourage them to have a go and to keep trying to get to teach them that their voice has power, that they have this thing that will get people to come and talk to them if they use it. And that kind of understanding is important to kind of develop early. Turn taking. So the idea that I do something and then I wait for you to do something. So if I do some sounds, then you're going to have a go at doing some sounds. Might not be the same sounds, but I'm using my voice, you're using your voice. Loads and loads of modelling, and as the children start to be able to produce sounds and have a go at saying words, really encouraging that imitation. So can you have a go at saying it? Your turn. Brilliant, being really positive about it. I put on there, be responsive to all vocalisations and word attempts, even if it starts off by burping or doing a raspberry. Oh, you made a sound. That's brilliant. I want to respond to that and encourage you to try and do some other sounds. Let's have a look, listen to these ones. And often when I do preschool groups, I spend a lot of time saying, oh, that's brilliant. Can you say it? Can you shout? Really make it clear. I want to hear you. Oh, I've heard you, brilliant. That kind of making it clear, that's a brilliant thing to be doing, really. So let's start off with our listening practice. When when I start to see children who are babies, I normally say around about 4 to 6 months, I would be thinking about introducing some sound cards. It's normally the first activity that I do when I meet a new parent. You want to get yourself a set of picture cards that represent the sounds of your language. And this, when you're talking, you're going to be making all of these sounds, but we know that our children are going to have difficulty hearing all those sounds and picking those sounds up. And when we're talking, those sounds are all in there, but they're all jumbled together. They're all very fast, and some of the sounds are harder to hear than others. So this really is giving the children a chance to hear and remember and store all of the sounds that we're using when we're talking. So choose a set of cards. It can be absolutely any card to represent our speech sounds. I want to include sounds that like sh and ch and th, where you've got two letters but they're making one sound. So including those. Often when children start school, they're introduced to some kind of phonics scheme to support teaching reading, and that often involves some picture cards, and they can be really useful cards to use. So if you've got an older child who's at school and is doing some kind of phonics scheme with some pictures, brilliant cards to use. Just to be clear, we're not doing phonics, we're just using those phonics cards to do some speech activities. And I normally say choose 8 to 10 from that pile, and you're going to run through those every day across the week. I say every day, knowing that nobody's going to do every day. But if I say every day, they might do 4 or 5 times a week, which would be brilliant. If I say 4 or 5 times a week, they might manage twice. I'd really like it to be a bit more than that. I also say concentrate on the consonants and forget about the vowels, because we tend to not have so much difficulty with the vowels. It's the consonants that we have more of a challenge with. So you can keep some vowels, particularly if your child can do some vowels. That can be a nice one to have in there, like R, for example. They can do R or they can do oo. Having that in there to go, oh, this one's R. Oh, you can do R. Brilliant. To kind of teach the game, fab, but you don't need to worry about practicing those quite so much. And if you've got a child, so I've talked about how I'd introduce them with babies. If you've got an older child and you haven't done this before and your child's already making some sounds, I would run through and say, oh, this one's, can you do that one? If they can, I'll put them in a pile of ones they can do. And if they can't, I'll put those on the pile I'm working on. I'll choose my 8 to 10 from the pile I'm working on. You might want to get a few that they can do. As I said before about the R's and the O's to support kind of motivation and understanding, but it's these ones that we can't do yet we're really going to be working on, and they're going to be the ones we're going to be working on across the week. Okay. Once we've been doing these cards for a while, we'll then move into doing some kind of discrimination or listening practice. And this is really working on helping your child to hear the differences between similar sounding sounds. So once they've been doing these sound cards for a few months, I would think, I think they know some of these now. First of all, I need to teach the game. So I start by choosing 2 sound cards, and I'll say, oh, this one is, so look, and when I'm saying the sounds, I want them to have a look at the card and I want them to have a look up to my face. So I say, oh, this one's s, s. Can you say that? S. Knowing they're not going to say anything yet because they're only 6 months old. But we're learning. And then can they look up to my face? And they will take some time to learn to do that, be able to look from one to the other. You might need to hold the card closer to your face to start with. So that makes it easier for them. Or it might be that they're really looking at the card and you're going to take it away and then say, and they look up to your face. You go, yes. And then I'm going to bring it back. So I'm going to teach you to look and listen and hear these kind of sounds. Then I'm going to say, oh, this one's, and then this one is B, for example. I'll say, oh, where, which one would you like? And I might, as we start, if they're choosing, I'll say, oh, where's, and if they look at or reach for, I'll say, brilliant. If they look at the wrong one or they don't really, they look at me, I'll go, there it is. Yeah, brilliant. So I'm teaching them the game. This one, remember? I want you to choose that one. So you've got to now, that's an extra challenge. It's not just can I hear them and do I know them? That's now, I've got to listen to your sound. I've got to remember your sound. I've got to scan these 2. I've got to remember which one you asked me to go for. And I've got to then find it and not go for the right one that's got my favourite picture of a dog on, for example. So it's quite a big ask, but we start off learning this game and I start off teaching it with very different sounding sounds like s and d. We call those distant pairs. And then once we've got the game and they understand, I make the sound and you find the right one, then I start to introduce those similar sounding sounds that we call minimal pairs. So they're things like b and d, or t and k, or s and sh, those sorts of pairs. I've just put a little note on, and now what we're doing is we're getting them to really hear the difference between those similar sounding sounds. Which one am I saying? Is it s? Which one is it? S. Brilliant, it's that one. Or so here we are. It's this one. So we're making sure more practice of listening and storing these sounds. And I've just put a note on there that it can be a really good activity in terms of giving you a bit of information about their hearing. If you think, oh, it's summer, we're free of colds, they've got this game down, they're really, really good at it. And then come autumn, colds start, I can see that mucus, which is getting in there, blocking up their ears, stopping their eardrums from vibrating, and they can't do it anymore. I know I need to get myself down to audiology and check their hearing status. Okay, so that's all about listening. And like I say, I start that with my babies, and then for the older ones, those sounds that they haven't got yet, lots and lots of listening practice. And then of course over time we're going to move on to I want them to say some of the sounds. Right from the beginning, I'm going to be encouraging them. I'm going to have turned off the radio, sat them in front of me so they can clearly see my face. Anytime they burp or make a raspberry or have a go at doing a even if they're not making a sound, I can see your lips. You're right. Brilliant. You're so clever. Really encouraging any kind of attempts to make a sound or any kind of oral kind of movement of the lips or teeth or tongue or whatever it might be. And then what will probably happen is you'll start to hear some sounds in their babble. So it might well be when they're in their cot or they're just on the doing a bit of tummy time and you're doing something else. You'll hear a bit of oh, hello, I just heard my first sounds. Brilliant. First of all, I'm going to rush over and go, yeah, Annie Clever, blah, blah. But I'm also going to listen out for what sounds I'm hearing. So if they're doing da, 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 I think, oh, hello, you can do duh. You might not be able to do it on cue yet or under your control, but I know that you can make duh. So I'm going to keep that one in my pile of ones I'm going to work on next week as well. And we'll spend a little bit more time thinking about can you have a go at making this sound. This one, duh, John, duh, duh, duh. Might even keep it on the coffee table or wherever you have. And so when they're on their tummy time and then you go duh, 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 you're going to go, you're right, it's duh. Da, da, da. Yeah, I'm making that link for you. That's what I want when I show you these cards. So think about the sounds you hear in babbles. Keep some sounds that the child can make. I said about that earlier on. If they can do duh, I'm going to keep that one in the pile. Once they've got it, I'm still keeping it in the pile because that's when you can do duh, 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 duh. Yes, that's what this game is all about. Let's try another one. Buh. Ready? Buh, buh. Showing you, modeling, giving a bit of pause. Expectant face. I'm waiting for you to kind of have a go, have a try. And then as the children are producing those sounds, we're going to be focusing on those ones that we know that they can't do yet. So I'll go to my pile of ones. We are doing listening practice for sure. But if we've already got some sounds, I'll be encouraging them to have a go. Can you have a go at this one? And if they have a go, then you're going to be really positive and give them lots of praise. Often my preschool children are clever. I said they have a strength in communication. They're really good at picking up on communication, on understanding social communication. They know very well the difference between, brilliant, you're right, you've matched a colour, and oh, it's this one. You try, and quickly they'll go, oh, I love this activity. She goes crazy for this one. I'm not so keen on this activity. She keeps telling me I haven't got it quite right and I have to do a bit more. So we want to make sure that we keep this activity really fun and engaging and encouraging for the children. I remember a long time ago I had a little lad in group who sound cards were not his favorite thing. Understatement. And I would say, oh, we're going to do our sounds now. Right, ready? This one is buh, buh, buh. You try. And he'd go, ah. Everybody loves my winning smile. Will she go, oh, aren't you lovely? Aren't you cute? No, buh, buh, buh. Then he'll go, oh, my W. And Mum goes and sits on Mum's lap. And then he's happy because you're not doing my job, right? I say, oh, buh. This one's buh. So much so that we got out, then later on got out a puppet of the Gruffalo, and he went, oh, ho. And I was like, oh, well, there is no way you're having a go at saying Gruffalo and you're not trying buh before you leave here. Ready? Bye. Buh. You try buh. Bye. Brilliant. You don't have to get it right, but I really, really want to encourage you to have a go. And as they start to develop those sounds, there are some sounds that typically come early for all children. Similarly, for children with Down syndrome, sounds like buh, duh. I have to say duh is often the first one's the easiest one. Sorry, dads. It's easier than I know you'd like to think it's because you're the most popular. Duh, buh, w, y, n. Those are kind of typically early ones to listen out for and have be practicing producing some of those sounds. Once you've mastered one of those sounds, like D, for example, I would be creating what I'd call a sound book or a sound box, which is just pictures or objects that begin with that sound. So now I know you know that sound and you can make that sound. I want to teach you that you need to produce that sound for all of these words. So again, it starts off with listening. It says dog. Can you say D? Dog. It says daddy. D, daddy. Da. You say that? Da, da, daddy. And making that link between that sound and that word, as I said. So we start with initial target is to produce that sound. So they might just say D, and I'll go brilliant. And then over time, as we're practicing these words, I'd expect for dog to go from D to do, and duck to go from D to duh, and then eventually to dog to duck. So I'm building up that word over time. And I would avoid clusters at the moment, things like dr for drink. Clusters come later, so we're really going for our target sound, our consonant sound, followed by a vowel to begin with. There's just some examples of sound book. So we've got baby, banana, balloon, boat, and again, to start with, all I want is B, please, that B that we've been working on. Or you could have a bag of objects, go around the house, find some things that begin with D, put them in the bag, take it out, it is dog, fantastic. Can you do dog? I want to hear you, D, dog. So that's kind of it, really. Choosing your sound targets, thinking about mastering those as single sounds, and then once you've mastered them as single sounds, thinking about activities to move them on into words. So sound boxes are a really great way to start. And then I've just got some other ideas of activities that I would do with my preschool children. Things like sorting sound books, those pictures from the books or those objects from the bags, into items that begin with one sound and items that begin with another sound. Now, these are all teaching activities. These aren't, I'm expecting my preschool children to be able to sort these things. Oh, look, we've got book. Which pile does that go in? Oh, it goes in that B pile, Becky. That's not what I'm expecting. What I'm doing is I'm a teaching activity where I'm getting them to sort. So I'll get my sound card, B, and I'll put it on the front of this basket. And I'll get my sound card for, so which one's this one? Lovely, have a go at sense. Brilliant. Stick it on the box for this one. And then I put some objects in the bag and I say, oh, what are we going to choose? Ready? Whose turn is it? Me, can't hear you. Where are you? Finish out all that business. Right, have a go. And they may go, oh, I say, what have you got? And they say, ock. I go, you're right. It's sock. Now, where does that one go? Can you hear B or S? Ready? Sock. 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 Oh, you're right. Goes in there. Aren't you so clever? What I'm doing is I'm getting them to really listen, and I'm making that initial target sound that's often missing, and that we're working on them using that sound really clear for them to hear and remember and to store up here. So that word that might be stored as ok or just oh, I'm going, there's a s at the beginning of that word. Can you hear it? Let me show it to you visually. It's got one of those on. Sock. Brilliant. And then can you have a go at saying it? Have a go at mastering those words. So yeah, what's interesting is often the children can do that, can sort items without too much help by the time they start school, if we've done some practice on those activities. Although it sounds like a hard activity, maybe, you might be surprised at what we actually achieve before we even start school. Another game example is I Spy. You know, everybody, I think, knows I Spy. I'm going to forget about the I Spy my little eyes at the beginning with. You can say that, but that's a lot to remember and to understand and to follow the instruction. But it's a good a reminder of, oh, I know this game. And I would start off with two objects. I might say I've got sheep and I've got, I don't know, horse. So I Spy my eyes, something to begin with shh. Which one is it? Shh. Is it sheep or horse? Shh. Which one? Which one? Sheep. Sheep. sheep, sheep, sheep. Yes, this one. Again, I'm helping you here. Remember, store up here. These sounds that we know are a bit tricky. What am I doing for time? Need to get a move on. Syllable marking is another activity which I'm sure lots of people will be familiar with, but just helping our children hear all of the syllables of a word. Some syllables will be more what we call stressed. We say them louder than other syllables. So things like computer. Can we do it together? Computer. Might start off as a listening activity. Computer. It's not just pooter. There's another one. Banana is another good one. Banana. And then having a go at getting them to mark all of those sounds with those with their voice. And those early kind of blending and segmenting activities, which we do use when we start to read later on. So I might have out the sheep and the horse and the cow, and I'll say, oh, which one is it? We've got or horse. Which one? I just have to stop parents from going, it's horse. Yeah, I know, you know. Horse, 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 horse. Hey, which one? But what I'm doing again is sounding out all of those sounds of the words really clearly, helping you hear all of these sounds, drawing your attention to all of these sounds, helping develop more accurate representations of these sounds, getting you to have a go with me. Let's have a go. Or horse, horse. Great, 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 great. Lots of great practice. And the same for segmenting. So you'd say, oh, we've got dog. What sounds can we hear in dog? You ready? We've got d, oh, go. You do it. So lots and lots of practice of hearing these sounds. And often, going back to what I said right at the beginning about visual learning and that visual memory strength, I will be starting to introduce words and letters for these activities and possibly some actions. Remembering that our focus is on the sounds, but these may help. So if I was doing I Spy, for example, I might say, I spy with my little eye. I've got these two pictures on the table, the monkey and the tiger. I say something beginning with, choose a magnetic letter from the pot. Oh, we've got, which one is it? Is it monkey or tiger? Let's have a look and we'll match that letter on. You're right, it is monkey. See it? Hear it? Remember it. And then those are just some cards for the kind of let's sound it out. D, oh, yeah. I'm not expecting the children to know their letter sounds before they go to school. They're just a prompt there to remind me and for them to have a go. I point to these, I'll make a sound, I have a go, which is great. An example of the old magnetic letters. Those cards are very, very old. And then I've got some very simple, exactly the same, but with the words on the back. So we start off by matching them, and then I'll say, oh, look, now we've got, which one is it? You think it's apple? Let's turn it over. Are you right? You are. Aren't you clever? There are loads and loads of games out there which come along with some letters, which I would say I spend a lot of time, not so much these days, but going around supermarkets looking at activities that I think, oh yeah, I could use that to make some sound activities up. Orchard Toys do some really good ones. Alphabet Lotto is a great one. They also do some three-letter words and then some four-letter words in there as well, where you've got it's like a cardboard base and it's got a picture of, let's say, fox, and you've got fox, and you've got the letters to match on. Can you find, let's see if you can, it's matching activity. You're great at matching visual skill. Practice saying the sounds, not reading them yet, that's not my target, but I'm giving them that visual, getting that extra practice of hearing, listening, having a go. So I'm just going to stop there. We're nearly there, actually. That kind of got to almost where I want to get to. But to say, having just said about the use of letters, I want to be really clear but in the difference between speech activities and phonics activities. Speech is obviously all about talking. Phonics is all about reading. And I said earlier on when I talked about sound cards, often though you may have a set of cards that comes along with a school phonics scheme that can be really useful, we are not doing phonics. We're not trying to teach my 4-month-olds to read. I'm using these materials as to support speech activities. All of the things I've talked about is about supporting that hearing, remembering, storing accurate words, and then having a go at producing the sounds and words around. Some of those activities will help with phonics and reading later on, and maybe linked. I mean, that's what children, that's when children learn to read, that's what they do. They go, oh, yeah, it's dog. And the teacher says, oh, what does it begin with? What can you hear? Let's sound it out. Let's sound it out like a robot. But they've already got all those words to do that skill with. What we're doing is we are developing all of those speech skills that are going to support reading later on. So if you get somebody, if you go to nursery tomorrow and say, oh, I went to this great talk where she said about doing some sound card activities. Have you got some sound cards? They go, oh, we don't do phonics until they turn 4. You're going to be really clear and say, no, we're not doing phonics. I just want them to practice speech activities. If you are feeling like, wow, she's covered loads of information and I did warn you that I was going to try, where do I possibly begin? I just wanted to mention some programs that are out there that might be of help to you. So Down Syndrome UK, we have our PEGS program, which is our preschool early development groups for parents. So you sign up for the year and you get, depending on the age of the child, you either get 1 video a month for the babies or 2 videos a month for 18 months and over. One of which focuses on speech language memory and the other one focuses on early reading, number, fine motor. So you get activities to watch, and then you have an online group to twice a month with, or as many times as you have videos, with one of our early development advisors. And those videos really go through what I've talked about tonight, but we start off just with the, oh, you're only 6 months, you're only 18 months. These are the activities I'll be starting with for you. There's also something called See and Learn, which is produced by a group called Down Syndrome Education, and they have a speech strand. They have a set of sound cards that go in there. I should have said, there's also as part of the PEGs, you can buy a kit which has a set of sound cards in. See and Learn has a set of sound cards. They then have their second set is about combining sounds, so putting sounds, simple sounds together, consonant vowels, and then works on saying words. Set 1 is those early sounds I mentioned, so it's pictures of things that begin with b, pictures of things that begin with d, pictures of things that begin with what, and so on. Set 2 is kind of the middle next set of sounds, and then set 3 is those harder sounds to say, like your f and your ch and your j. There's also something called the Nuffield Dyspraxia program. Now, sometimes we might get questions about whether children with Down syndrome can have dyspraxia, whether all children with Down syndrome have dyspraxia. What is dyspraxia? Typically, it's known as a motor programming, motor planning difficulty. So the children with dyspraxia have difficulties saying sounds and putting sounds into words, which is exactly what we know is true for our children with Down syndrome. It starts off with pictures of sounds, and then it works on putting sounds together. So it does all the things that I've talked about tonight. So if you come across one of those, any of those would be useful in terms of practicing putting sounds together. Okay, so just to kind of finish, there are specific speech difficulties associated with Down syndrome. It's not just because we've got Down syndrome, we have speech difficulty. That's why. It's not just because we don't understand words or because we've got a cognitive delay. There is a very specific, more than we would predict, difficulty with speech, which means that speech work should really be a focus from the beginning and needs to continue throughout school. Any program that you're doing, I would expect lots and lots of practice at listening and lots of practice of saying sounds and then saying those sounds in words, practicing saying words. Progress can be slow when I give over the sound cards in that kind of first instance, and your baby's only little. I just say these are going to be with you for a long time. This isn't something that's going to be like, oh, I've been doing those cards for 2 months now. Now it's sorted. They are going to go into school. They are going to be replaced by letters as you learn your letters, and we're going to be continuing to work on speech until we've mastered it really. Um, And that input, all the input that you're doing, and I know sometimes parents will say, "Oh, Becky, I've been doing those sound cards and they're not saying any sound." And I say, "Well, remember this conversation, and maybe in a year or so's time, they're like, well, they won't shut up." Do you know what I mean? And I said, "Oh, do you remember when you sat in that session and you thought it's not going in?" All of that input is so important. And that's what the kind of PEGS groups are all about. It's not about can a child do this yet? It's about activities for parents that are going to be helpful over time in teaching their child these sorts of skills. So I've got a link on there to the early development groups, and I've also got a link on there to our events and training page, which I'm sure you'll be familiar with if you've found your way here. But there are those other sessions I talked about at the beginning, thinking about vocabulary and language and communication. And then there are about a million other sessions that you might be interested in on hearing, on vision, on toileting, there's loads on there. So do have a look, keep your eye on there. We have these regular live sessions, and there is also lots of sessions that are pre-recorded and available on demand. So do have a look at those. Right.